Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Wildcat Dash, a very special episode of Wildcat Dash here on Dash Sports TV. My name is Jacob Nudie. I'm joined with a familiar Dash Sports face, but an unfamiliar face on Wildcat Dash, Kieran Murphy, joining us from Buffalo Dash. How are we today, Kieran?
Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. Why don't we just get into previewing this game? It's certainly been a wacky year of college football. There's been a lot of different projections and preseason predictions, before this season started. And while Bears and the Wildcats are playing about how everyone expected, I would even argue that they're playing worse than people expected. But although they're underachieving, Colorado certainly is not. The Buffaloes are 3-0, while the Wildcats are 0-3, and it's just so interesting to me because these two teams were projected to be battling for second to last place in the conference this season. Both teams, all the projections were, Arizona's going to be last, Colorado's going to be second to last, or, Arizona's going to be second to last and Colorado's going to be last. Like, that's basically how it was. Everyone was projecting these two teams to not be very good. And, everyone was saying that, and then here we are, the Buffaloes are 3-0 and, trending upwards while Arizona continues to spiral into the ground. They're currently on a 10-game losing streak dating back to last season. And, you and Jason over at Buffalo Dash have been very high on this Colorado team from the beginning. So you obviously knew something that nobody else didn't. So, why don't you tell me a little bit more about this team? What is Colorado doing this season that, has allowed them to just completely exceed everyone's expectations?
Yeah, dude. Excuse me. Jason and I think we were positive on this Colorado team, but not nearly as positive as they've proved to be. So, we were definitely coming into the season looking at the season as an opportunity for us to rebuild, just because it's obviously been, a super funky season with COVID and everything. And so then for the Buffs to for the Buffs to actually kind of be on this 3-game winning streak this season is definitely a surprise. They ended up going with a starting quarterback that me and Jason were not particularly strong on. So we were basically pushing for the true freshman Brendan Rice to be not Brendan Rice, Brendan Lewis, to be the starting quarterback, because we were sort of really big on let's get the freshman quarterback in there, build the system around him and let him sort of be the leader of this team for the next 4 years. And then they ended up going with Sam Neuer. So Sam Neuer played safety under Mel Tucker actually last year, even though he was recruited to Colorado as a quarterback, and is in his 5th year and was actually thinking about entering the transfer portal going into this year. And then the fact that Carl Durrell decided to go with him was sort of a big surprise, and me and Jason definitely did not think it was the right choice at all. Since seeing him play and seeing that Carl Durrell is really sort of leading this team in a way that they play sort of within themselves rather than trying to keep up with teams that have super strong passing offenses or just really strong run games, etc. It's like the kind of thing where we definitely they don't play the sexiest brand of football, but they play just a brand of football that, gets first downs, moves the chains, and has been, winning games just sort of inch by inch. But I will say that, having watched, the Arizona games thus far, Arizona's been putting up a fight with really, really good teams that were, for example, the USC game, right? So USC, Arizona managed to close that USC game down to, a pretty tight game versus Arizona. And I think that that's a testament to the fact that COVID has definitely evened the playing field for a lot of teams, but Arizona is capable of putting up a fight against, really good teams in this conference. And they just haven't really seen that win yet.
That game against USC was the only good game. They were terrible in the other 2 games, but it's just so crazy because I just can't help but think how differently these two teams are trending right now. Colorado has all the momentum in the world right now, riding this win streak, and its star players and are just proving how good they actually are. And Arizona is just the polar opposite on that scale. They haven't won a game since October of 2019, not October of 2020, October of 2019. It's been over a year. Current players are opting out left and right, and future commits are recommitting and reopening their recruitments, and Arizona has lost 2 future commitments in the last few days. Like, it's a tough scene right now. And, I go back to one of the biggest complaints right now that I have about this team and about this football program is just the lack of brand and, the lack of identity that this team has or doesn't have, I should actually be saying. Like, I mean, I don't mean to, I don't want to bombard you with questions, but I just can't get over the fact that this Arizona team is the only team in the conference that just hasn't figured it out yet. Like, Colorado is 3-0. UCLA is 500 for, the first time in the Chip Kelly era. Oregon State just knocked off Oregon and spoiled their college football playoff hopes. Like, everyone, all these teams that have been struggling in the past years have somehow figured it out. Every team except Arizona. So, like, what is Arizona doing wrong? Like, is it a branding thing? Like, how big of a factor has Colorado's brand as a football program been playing out this season, with its new head coach? Because it really feels like, it's a fresh start for Colorado. Like, is that what's made them successful? Like, is that what it is?
I think it is. Colorado had really sort of, like, the football program in Colorado had really, I feel like, sort of relegated itself to accepting mediocrity as the fate of Colorado football year in and year out. I mean, it was the kind of thing where we were going approximately 500 more or less pretty much every season, with the exception of 2016, where we made it to the Pac-12 championship, and they started this whole hashtag of, like, the rise is real, right? It was like, like Colorado's coming back to the the form that we saw it in the form that existed. We didn't see it, us personally, we were too, we weren't even necessarily alive yet, but in the late 80s, early 90s, when Colorado won that national championship in 1990, and then was this national powerhouse, and so everybody's like, oh, this is back. And then we get blown out by Washington in the Pac-12 championship, and proceed to have, like, 2 losing seasons following it, and then we fired our head coach. So we had definitely struggled with that similarly. And people kind of thought that Mel Tucker last year was going to bring in that new brand, so to speak, of football, especially coming from the SEC. Bringing in, like, an SEC defensive coordinator where, I think we can all agree that in the SEC, they just take, football's a different deal in the SEC, right? They take it seriously to a totally different level than most things are taken seriously, like, anywhere, let alone sports, right? And so then for Carl Durrell to come in and sort of change the way that this team's playing. So, I mean, I think over the course of the last couple of years, since I've been a CU football fan, since I've football, one of the things that we've had this issue of doing is, like, especially with Steven Montez at quarterback and stuff, is, the kid had a huge arm, and we would try to then pace with teams like a USC, right? So we played USC last year, and Keaton Slovis, one of the better quarterbacks, I think, sort of has emerged to be one of the better quarterbacks in the nation. Following him earning that starting spot after they had some injuries last year, was putting up massive numbers in terms of throwing yards and stuff compared to Colorado. And they have a great wide receiver core and stuff. And then what happened last year is, when we played them, that we started trying to sort of go, like, shot for shot with them, like, in terms of stretching the field and things like that. And that wasn't necessarily where our strengths lay. And so what I've been really excited to see that Carl Durrell's doing is the fact that we have this really strong defense this year. We have, like, sort of a veteran defense, let way less young players or new players to the positions on defense compared to our offense. And while we have a lot of potential for talent on the offense, we don't have nearly as much sort of veteran experience, and starting with the quarterback, right, the most important offensive position of it all. And so I think the fact that he's kind of chosen to take CU football in this direction of, we're just going to play within ourselves and limit mistakes and limit turnovers and things like that, as a result, sort of try to develop a little bit of just momentum by just doing that. And that, if we just do what we know we're good at, it'll begin to win games. That's what I've really seen to be sort of the big success for Colorado thus far under Carl Durrell. And I'm excited to see where that goes longer term. And obviously, this could look a lot different next year when, we bring fans back into the stadium and stuff like that. But I think for right now, I'm excited to see the way that he's sort of reshaped Colorado's football brand, if you will.
I love that. They're just using the guys that they have and not necessarily worrying about what other people are doing. Because I think Arizona's not doing that right now, especially last year. I mean, I think they're doing it a little bit more this year just because I think Grant Gunnell naturally fits the scheme that Noel Mazzoni wants to run. But last year, Khalil Tate cannot run that Noel Mazzoni offense. They're two different styles of play. Like, we never saw Khalil Tate, take his check down. He would, if that first read wasn't open, he would just bomb it down the field. Like, that's not the offense that Noel Mazzoni wanted to run in. He was really stubborn with Khalil Tate last year. He didn't, adapt to Khalil Tate's strength. They tried a little bit, with the RPOs, but that's not exactly the same. So, with Grant Gunnell being hurt and, this pandemic filled season, nothing's going to be easy this year. So it's hard to really, nitpick what's going on this year. But I look back at last year and I was just so frustrated with, not having this coaching staff adapt to the players that they actually have. But I don't know. Enough about, ranting about this Arizona team. Well, let's talk more specifically about this game on Saturday. Arizona's previous 2 losses have been, the exact same narrative. They've gotten dominated in the run game. Line has been terrible. A lot of these games are won and lost, in a single position group. So, I mean, tell me, what are some key matchups that you are looking forward to, and which position group do you feel like will make the biggest impact tomorrow?
I mean, so the position group that we've truly been relying on the most game in and game out has been our defensive backs. I mean, so Nate Landman, first and foremost, he won defensive player of the week nationally last year, which was massive for him. We knew he was going to be a sort of a major force coming into the season. He's a senior, been playing, he's had a lot of minutes on the field, managed to play a pretty strong role at that linebacker position last year. In addition to Carson Wells, we had some veteran players that we knew were going to be sort of very staunch defensive forces to be reckoned with coming into the season. And so and we knew that coming in, and while we've had offensive players that have put up some really sort of surprisingly big numbers. Those were definitely that was definitely the main position that we knew we were gonna, if all else fails, have to rely on. And against Stanford, that's what we ended up having to do. They really just had to come up big. And Landman, similar to against San Diego State, he had this massive 4th down stop against Stanford that really sealed the deal when Stanford was sort of making this late game push to try to force overtime at the very least. And so he and Carson Wells, Mustafa Johnson in the defensive back positions and defensive end positions at for Colorado have been who we knew we were going to have to rely on coming into the season, and who we have relied on, to be honest, more so than perhaps they necessarily always get credit for. But on the offensive side of the ball, we've seen some really consistent play from players that we didn't even know about. So Jarek Broussard, for example, right? So he's running back for the Buffs, and one tough thing about going into the season that I'm sure you guys dealt with in terms of your analysis over at Arizona coming into the season too is we didn't have anything to work with. We didn't have anything to see. We didn't have any spring practice. We didn't have any there's no cameras at spring practices and stuff like that, because it's get as many people out of here that aren't essential to us just doing what we've got to do. And as a result, we didn't know what we were working with. We were just working with press conferences after practice and stuff and being well, so is so-and-so gonna is this person or that person gonna be starting, or is that what we're planning on relying on? And so it really took a couple of games in order for us to see what the game plan is here for the Buffs. And Rick Broussard, first week had this massive game, and we've since seen that the running back core for Colorado has been super essential just because of Sam Noyer's inexperience throwing the ball downfield. That while we have some really, really talented wide receivers that I think have been a little bit underrated to some extent. They're also largely a pretty young group of wide receivers. And so offensively, we've been relying on our running backs big time to just sort of inch by inch, yard by yard, down by down, like, move the chains. And it's not the most exciting sort of brand of football necessarily because we're not seeing these 87-yard bombs. But at the same time, we're, limiting the potential for Sam Neuer's mistakes, in his first year at the quarterback position to, by sort of keeping the ball in the running back's hands for the most part. But I mean, I don't know about like so for you, what are you matchups are you seeing sort of have been at least fairly positive, or you see a lot of potential for on the Wildcat side of the ball? Despite whatever struggles they've had thus far, with the offensive line and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm going to be watching, Colorado's defensive line going up against Arizona's offensive line because that's been Arizona's downfall for 3 weeks straight now. Just poor offensive line play. Now, granted, the Wildcats have faced USC, Washington, and UCLA, who arguably have the best defensive lines in the conference. I mean, those three teams the conference in sacks. So I believe UCLA is first and Washington second and then USC. And I think Colorado is actually fourth in the conference in total sacks. So, Arizona's first 4 games are going up against arguably the best defensive lines in the conference. Now, I know total sacks, of course, aren't a direct correlation to how good your defensive line is. But I mean, it certainly gives you an idea about how good that unit is. So, I don't know. I think that's going to be the name of the game. And Arizona's offensive line got whooped in its first 3 games. They've given up 11 or 12 sacks or something like that in its first 3 games. It's just terrible, right? So if this offensive line plays anything like they did in, the past games, it's going to be another really ugly one. But I'm pretty optimistic about, I don't really know, actually. I mean, how good is Colorado's secondary? Because as bad as, this offense has been, Arizona's offense has been, I thought it's been good. It was good against USC, but it was, it was underwhelming in the other games, in my opinion. But as bad as it's been, I've still been pretty optimistic about Pat's wide receiver group. I think Jamari Joyner is very talented. I think, Stanley Berryhill has been very productive. Brian Castile has a lot of upside. Majon Wright, Booby Curry has a lot of upside. I'm waiting around for these wide receivers to have a breakout game. And they haven't really got the opportunity to do that because, they played USC in week 1 who has Chris Steele. So he was just boxing Booby Curry up all game, and Washington has the best, secondary in the conference, probably the best secondary, one of the best secondaries in the entire nation. They're always good, So, and then of course last week, the injury to Grant Gunnell on the first play of the game certainly didn't help the momentum and chemistry of the wide receivers either. So I'm waiting around for this wide receiver group to have an opportunity to have a breakout game. So could that actually happen this week? I mean, I don't know too much about Colorado's secondary, but is there any, particular spot where they can exploit that?
I mean, so to be honest, we haven't seen a lot of Colorado's secondary yet. And that was part of what me and Jason were really looking forward to with the USC game that ended up being canceled, was that we know that USC is this sort of high-powered, offense, especially when it comes to putting the ball in the air. And the teams we played so far with, Stanford and UCLA and San Diego State, none of them really put the ball in the air a ton. And so I think that Colorado's secondary hasn't really been tested yet. And so I think that if, in terms of matchups that could potentially, keep the Wildcats in this game that's definitely an area where we could potentially see Colorado's defense break down a little bit in ways that they haven't thus far. And so it'll be really interesting to see. We have a lot of young guys playing, at the cornerback and sort of safety positions that just, it's tough because in practice they're playing, against they're either, on the offensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball, Sam Neuer is practicing mostly just, with running offense practice because that's what we've been relying on thus far. And so, the guys who are going to be starting in the game, whatever the scout team's throwing at them, they're getting those reps, I guess. But in terms of getting real in-game reps against, a passing offense that could stand to potentially be able to exploit them. Like we don't really know, and we haven't sort of just been able to see whether it's spring games, whether it's training camp, whether it's practices. Like we haven't seen any of that, and so that's definitely a little bit of a black box, I think, for me so far, in terms of like the one area of Colorado's team that we haven't really seen have to step up significantly at all yet, because just of the nature of the teams we've played. And so I think that is definitely a spot where the Wildcats could step up significantly. And if the passing game is on for the Wildcats, this could end up being a closer game than the team's 2 records suggest. And so I think that's definitely something to look out for.
I think it's just going to come down to whoever is going to be the quarterback for Arizona. Obviously we don't know if Grant Gunnell is going to play tomorrow. I actually hope he doesn't play tomorrow. I don't think he's going to be 100% ready to go. But why don't we talk about some final score predictions for this game? We just laid everything out. We broke everything down. I mean, how do you see this game playing out? I just talked about how it'll probably be a big part of it will be whoever is the Arizona's quarterback, but the line right now is 7 points in favor of Colorado. So, the Wildcats are underdogs in this one. It's also their first home game since their season opener against USC a couple weeks ago. So, I don't know. Arizona's had a ton of success against Colorado in the past. Like, they don't beat a lot of teams very often, but they have had a lot of success against the Buffs more times than not. But obviously that was a completely different team, and this is a new Colorado squad now. So things are certainly different. But how do you see this one playing out?
I mean, I think we're definitely going to see, a very defensive battle, because while Colorado has managed to get the job done in the 3 games that they've played and stuff, it's really come largely from their defense. I mean, against San Diego State last week, like their defense is what kept them in the game and ended up sort of saving them. I mean, Carl Durrell even said so in his post-game presser, that he was like, our defense stepped up huge when our offense was having trouble getting things going. And, the main, bit of offense that we ended up giving San Diego State was because Sam Neuer threw a pick 6, and then they turned that in for 7 and then kicked a field goal on top of that. But, so our defense is what kept us in that game. And I expect our defense to keep us in this game again, because while we've got aspects of our offensive side of the ball that are beginning to excel, none of them, they still only have 3 games maximum sort of under their belt, and it's funky. And so I definitely expect it to be a very sort of just a defensive battle on both sides, potentially a little bit of a sloppy game, on the offensive side of the ball for both teams. And so I predicted probably a lower score. And my score prediction would be in the ballpark of like a 24-10 or 24-7 Buffs win. If it were, if it were my very unprofessional prediction. But how about yourself?
I don't really know about this one. I think like if Grant Gunnell ends up playing tomorrow, I think it'll be a little bit more of a competitive game. But I really don't think he's going to play. I think Kevin Sumlin has really kept that one close to the chest, and I think that injury is a lot worse than what they're making it out to be. He's been very secretive about what the injury actually is, but we've seen that injury before. When you get tackled and you land on that throwing shoulder, like that's a broken collarbone almost every single time, right? So like I think this is a bigger injury than what Kevin Sumlin is making it out to be. So I expect, Will Plummer to start this game again, the freshman coming in. I thought he did all right last week. I mean, especially for being a true freshman and just being thrown out there on the second play of the game. Like, I don't think he expected that to happen at all. Like, sure, he threw 2 interceptions, but those 2 interceptions were late in the fourth quarter when the game was already done. Like, I called that game quits as soon as Arizona botched that field goal hold, where they fumbled the field goal. The game was over as soon as that happened. So, like, he threw those 2 picks after that play had happened. So you can't really blame him for that. I think the stats looked a lot worse than how he actually played, but I don't really know. It's so crazy because I had pinned this game as just an automatic win at the start of the season for Arizona. Like, I thought Colorado was the only team that was worse than Arizona coming in this season. Like, I was looking at this team. They got a new head coach. They're going to have a new quarterback, and one of them's a former safety. Like, I thought they were just going to have a ton of problems, and Arizona has had success against Colorado in the past. So I didn't think much of this game, but now I'm looking at this team and I'm seeing that the Buffs are 3-0 and Arizona's 0-3, just going completely different directions. Like, I don't know anymore. Like, I think what scares me the most about this game is, the run game, like you talked about earlier. I think Jarek Burchard is very good, and Arizona has not had very good success against good running backs and against good run games this season. Like, I thought they did a solid job against USC, but they're not much of a run offense, right? Like, they're very much air raid and inside zones to Stephen Carr. Like, nothing too crazy there, but they got torched by Washington, who obviously has like one of the best running games in the conference. Demetric Felton last week tore us apart. Like, they just don't have good success against good running backs and against good running games. And I think Jarek Burchard is another really good running back. So that scares me the most. I just think that this is going to be another one of those games where Arizona just gets torched on the ground, and they're not going to be able to control this game. They're just going to get ran all over. But after listening to you talk about Colorado's secondary, I might be a little more optimistic about their passing game. But I think defense wins games, right? And I think the defense actually played well last week against UCLA. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Arizona's defense is playing better than Arizona's offense right now. I would have never thought that would be happening. But I think this game is going to be won by the defense, like you were just saying. And I think the run game really, really makes me nervous. So I think Colorado also covers the spread here. Tough, because I don't know if home or away really makes too much of a difference, being a home game with no fans, but I don't really know. I think Colorado covers the spread in this one, but the Pac-12 is so wacky, right? Like, we see crazy things happen every single week. So maybe Arizona pulls this one out, but I have no idea really.
I mean, you never know what kind of whether there's a day of test, like positive COVID test or something of that nature. I mean, we saw it with Stanford and Oregon, right? The Davis Mills, tested positive like day of the game, and then it was like, everything, and then everything's just like thrown out the window, right? And so I think the one thing that I think Colorado will bring into this game in terms of just another thing that I would just add to their side of positive attributes and stuff is that this game means a lot for them, because in order for them to have, they're tied with USC record wise in the Pac-12 South right now. And in order for them to have a shot at a Pac-12 championship, Colorado is going to have to show up and show up, win this game, because then they've got Utah next week on Friday here in Boulder. That is they have to win out, and they need USC to lose one of their next two games in order for them to have a shot, because there's no head-to-head matchup between the two, and USC's got the AP advantage on Colorado. And so that was one thing that me and Jason were talking a lot about, is that in order for the Buffs to even be in the discussion, have a discussion about a Pac-12 championship, they have to win out. And so I'm hoping that is on the mind of our players going into this game. So it's just, go into Tucson, get business done, get out, and then be able to, start looking ahead to a Utah team that didn't even play their first two games of the season and stuff. And so, so I'm hoping that will motivate our players to show up and be disciplined and, play the kind of game that they need to. But Colorado's also not, averse to playing down to the level of their opponents, certainly historically. And so it's the kind of thing where that could also, easily keep Arizona in this game. And obviously we know that COVID has just thrown such a wrench in the college football season that it's sort of leveled the playing field, across the board in terms of how teams manage to play and stuff. And, as you said, home field versus away really having an advantage is sort of taken out of the picture. And, there's a lot less to really be able to make any sort of accurate prediction on these days. And so, I'm hoping that will help fire up the Buffs to get a win in Tucson, but you never know.
It's weird. This game kind of has a feel of this could be a big game. Like you were just talking about how important this game is for Colorado. This is a pretty big game for Arizona too. Like, they're on a 10-game losing streak. They got to cut this off right now, because guys are leaving. Guys are starting to doubt this program, and it's spiraling to the ground right now. And if they don't win again here, and it's another, Arizona could easily go 0-5 and 0-6 for the rest of the season. Like, they need this win to at least save the season somehow. But I think this really has this big game feel, and I think it'll be an interesting one for sure. But we are unfortunately out of time here. I want to thank Kieran one more time for coming on and talking some football with us and previewing tomorrow's game. Is there anything that you would like to plug here before we hop off?
No, nothing on my side, man.
Sweet, yeah. But as for us, Wildcat Dash, we are live here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for you Arizona folks. We're in that weird, awkward transition where we don't do time the daylight savings here in Arizona, so the Mountain Standard Time thing super confusing. But that's only half of what we also write columns now with our collaboration with Sports Pack 12. You can check that out over at sportspack12.com, where our co-hosts write columns following our weekly shows. You can also check us out on our website over at dashsports.tv, where we post all of our clips and full shows. The website looks way different now, so if you haven't checked it out, it looks way cooler now, so you got to check that out if you haven't yet. You can also follow us on social media over on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.